Hello guys, this is Dark Fox Sage 2 and we are back with our new fanfic, which is What If Naruto Was Knucklehead Ninja Girl Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and please subscribe to the channel. It motivates me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. Now let's start the fanfiction. I hate being a girl, the blonde muttered as she wearily entered the Hokage's tower. You're on time for once, Tsunade said as she looked up from the paperwork with a grin. It's good to see that you're looking better today. Her smile twitched when there was no reply. Shizune edged over before she lightly tapped Naruto on the shoulder. The blonde girl immediately stopped staring at a blank section of wall above and slightly to the left of the Hokage. When Naruto's eyes were firmly on her again, Tsunade started. Now that you're finally with us again, I have a C-rank mission for you, brat, she said as she held out a scroll for Naruto to take. Naruto quietly took the rolled parchment before her eyes widened. See, really? She asked in disbelief, as some life returned to her. Told you that you would regret keeping me on D-ranked missions, she said with a cocky grin. Don't flatter yourself, I ran out of nin, the fifth coolly replied as she shuffled a few papers before leaning casually on her desk with one arm. The good cheer fell from Naruto's face. You can come in now, Tsunade shouted. Hokage-sama, Tenten asked as she slid the door aside, stepped in, and bowed deeply. Normally I would assign someone of Chuin rank to lead, however we have a shortage of nin right now so I don't have a choice. Tenten, I designate you the leader, the blonde woman said as she held up a hand to hold off any protests. She needn't have bothered, Naruto was staring quietly out the window. It's an honor, the girl with twin odangos in her hair stammered. Naruto suddenly blinked before she turned to the older girl. Who are you? Tenten looked oddly at the blonde girl. You don't remember me. We participated in the Chunin exams together, Naruto. Naruto thought about it for a moment before her face lit up. You're Tsunade Bakan in Dischi. Tsunade calmly returned to her seat, her left fist smoking slightly. I'm Tenten, the newcomer said as she stared at the scene with wide eyes. Naruto immediately leapt up with a hand rubbing the newest bump on her head. She pointed at the weapon's mistress with her other hand. Now I remember. You're the Bunji I mean, Tenten-san, hello. Naruto quickly said as she pulled her pointing hand back as if she had just burnt it. The weapon's mistress was glaring menacingly at her, so it wasn't a big stretch. Interestingly enough, Tsunade was turned away and asking Shizune something when the glare had occurred. Where's the rest of your team? The blonde girl asked curiously. Neji leaves the hospital tomorrow, Tsunade said without looking up from a mission scroll. Tenten shuffled slightly before adding her piece. Lee has been holed up in his room for a few days now. I've heard that you were the last one to see him. Dia know why he's blubbering about babies. Miles away, a large gong suddenly appeared within a large red canyon. A man struck it with a large padded stick. Doom. When the scene returned, Naruto was huddling in a corner surrounded by will-o'-the-wisps. She was shivering violently. Tenten slowly turned to the Hokage with a skeptical expression on her face. So this is my teammate? I'm afraid so, Tsunade replied without batting an eye. As you can see, she's been a bit useless lately. The blonde girl threw up her hands as a huge kunai suddenly seemed to stab her in the back. She fell forward and, with a BWAT, numbly kissed the floor. So pick your final team member. The fifth said, ignoring the younger blonde's antics as she held out a stack of folders. Tenten picked up the topmost file. Kiba, she quietly muttered. Naruto suddenly pushed herself up and shouted, no. At the corner. Raising an eyebrow, Tenten put Kiba's file down before she picked up another. Choji. No boys, no boys. The blonde girl chanted as she sat and hugged her knees. She rocked back and forth in the corner. The two stared at the blonde girl for a moment before they turned back to the pile and made a decision. That takes out a few choices, Tsunade commented as she found and pulled back two more files. Tamari. The girl with twin buns asked with a raised eyebrow when she saw the name on top of what was left. She isn't a leaf nin in disguise, is she? You're right, she isn't. As a sign of Suna's cooperation with Konoha, they've agreed to lend their best group of genin to us for missions. Are you selecting Tamari? Tsunade asked curiously. No way, the weapons mistress said with a dark look on her face. Well, hurry up and decide then, the Hokage impatiently said. The dark look disappeared. Yes, Hokage-sama, Tenten shouted with a salute, her energy surprising everyone in the room. Tenten quickly scrolled through the remaining profiles. There were 4 to choose from. Sakura. Range. Average. Melee. Poor. Genjutsu. Average. Ninjutsu. Poor. No combat specialties. Hinata. Range. Poor. Melee. Good. Genjutsu. Average. Ninjutsu. Poor. Good at melee. Ino. Range. Good. Melee. Poor. Genjutsu. Average. Ninjutsu. Average. Good at range. Neji. Sorry, I missed one, the Hokage said with a neutral look as she pulled the folder from Tenten's hands. 3 to choose from. Tenten quickly checked what her current team consisted of. Naruto. Range. Poor. Melee. Good. Genjutsu. Poor. Ninjutsu. Good. Good at melee and ninjutsu. Tenten. Range. Excellent. Melee. Poor. Genjutsu. Poor. Ninjutsu. Average. Excellent at range. It wasn't much to work with. In that case, I'll pick Sakura-chan, piped a voice from the corner. The two looked at the short blonde that had a pleading look on her face. Haruno-san, Tsunade asked curiously, turning back to the team leader. Tenten nodded. She'll fit. And Naruto has a history of working with her unlike the other two, she added. Very well then, we'll inform Naruto's teammate. Your mission begins in an hour. Dismissed. Tenten immediately left the room. And where do you think you're going? A voice demanded as the blonde girl moved to follow the brown-haired one. Naruto turned around quietly to look at the speaker. She had a dull sleepy expression on her face. Tsunade cracked her fist a few times with a giant grin on her face. After stretching in her seat, and failing to get a rise from the younger blonde, she med and pointed towards a set of black clothing that Shizune held in her hands. Naruto's clear blue eyes sharpened immediately. No. This is the newest ninja suit design for kunoichis. You will wear it, Tsunade said, putting heavy emphasis on the last few words. Fine. The girl said irritatedly as she stepped forward and took the ninja suit. She stepped back and turned to look at the Hokage and her apprentice to ask them if she could leave yet. Tsunade and Shizune's eyes were bugged out. Just like that, Tsunade finally had the presence of mind to ask. I don't feel like fighting today, the ex-container quietly said before her eyes suddenly widened and she fell backwards onto the floor. Tsunade pulled her hand back from the startled girl's forehead. Climbing back over her desk, she looked at her assistant before reporting, no fever. Shizune nodded, a pensive look on her face. An evil grin suddenly appeared on the Hokage's face as she sat back down in her seat. Well, if she's in such a nice mood, why don't we have her wear that? Off to the side, a chill raced up the short blonde's spine. What? Naruto asked as her eyes widened. Shizune looked confused for a moment before comprehension dawned on her face. A determined look appeared on her face as she turned to a large bag that Taunton was sitting next to. Taunton immediately leapt out of the way and Shizune started rummaging through the contents of the large bag. She stopped for a brief moment before she withdrew her hands. Cupped within her hands was something extremely flowery. In moments, Naruto's eyes were the size of dinner plates. Letting out a brief cry, she ran for the exit only to leap back as several kunai embedded themselves in the wood. Naruto turned and backed away warily as Shizune slowly approached with a large innocent smile. You will look nice with this, the older kunoichi reassuringly said. No. Naruto screamed before she swiveled around and punched the sliding door with everything that she had. Someone on the other side gave a shout as papers flew into the air when the door suddenly fell right on him. Naruto immediately jumped over the fallen door and ran for it. Naruto-kun. Wait! Shizune shouted. She stepped on the door several times as she raced after the younger girl, eliciting cries of pain from underneath. Tsunade watched all of this happen with a touch of disdain. The flower in the hair wasn't quite what she had in mind. Sure, it would look nice, but she opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a large cat's bell. This would look so much better on Naruto. Then she sighed depressedly as she set the ting-a-linging object aside. Blasted appearances. If she wasn't the Hokage, she'd help her apprentice corner the brat. They could share the spoils of their victory then. She paused to think. A flower and a bell. She shivered slightly before a vicious smirk appeared on her face. Naruto-chan would look dangerously cute. Sighing, she looked at the stack of papers right next to her. Sighing again, she reached for the next sheet of paperwork and pulled it in front of her to read. Her eyes slowly closed as she stared at the first line. Soon Tsunade was sleeping on a funding request from the orphanages of Konoha. Something about lining the caretaker's pockets with more money. Close enough anyway. Whatever the real reason was, she was covering it with drool, so it probably wasn't important. Underneath the fallen door, someone was moaning in pain as several busy office workers impatiently crossed as they tried to keep up with their workload. Hey, the aide shouldn't have had a door fall on him in a busy hallway. Naruto slowly staggered out of the Hokage tower. A figure hidden in the shadows chose that moment to pounce, and Naruto soon had a pair of arms around her neck as she was hugged tightly. I finally get to meet Tsunade-sama, Tenten said from behind the blonde girl. I thought I was going to be sick. The girl said as the stars in her eyes continued to twinkle. A disgruntled look appeared on Naruto's face. Tsunade Baba, she isn't much, she loudly said. Bonk. Ait. The blonde girl cried as she huddled near the ground as yet another bump appeared on her head. Tenten had a shocked look on her face as she vigorously shook her hand. This girl had a hard head. Speaking of which, her eyes narrowed as she suddenly remembered something. What are you wearing today? She asked as she looked down at the blonde. Naruto stopped nursing her newest bruise to glare at the ground. She suddenly looked up when a spike of killing intent struck her. She saw Tenten's narrowed eyes. Hokage-sama said that it was a ninja suit. I'm not sure if you can call that a dress, the girl with twin odangos muttered. What? Naruto asked, looking up curiously at the older girl. It's popular news among the others. You have a different dress each day and they're starting to take bets on what you'll be wearing tomorrow, Tenten helpfully supplied. Then put me down for orange jumpsuit tomorrow, the blonde girl cheerfully said, wanting to join in on the fun. You can't join Lee. Tenten stopped speaking to stare curiously at the blonde's head. Is that a flower hairpin in your hair? No. The Neo girl vehemently shouted. The great Naruto Uzumaki wearing something as girly as a flower in here is his hair. The brunette grinned and held out her hand. Well, take it out and give it to me then. I'd like to be wrong at these guessing games for once. Naruto stared speechlessly at the older girl. Well, are ya going to? Tenten asked impatiently with her hand still out and ready to receive the hair accessory. No. The blonde girl stubbornly shouted. Tenten was called back up to the Hokage's office for a few last-minute details, leaving Naruto to wait alone outside of the tower. Without her whisker marks, the random crowd paid her no attention. Since an empty section of the wall was currently occupying her attention again, it was safe to say that she didn't care. Someone approached the blonde girl from behind. Naruto, I heard we had a mission Toge. Oh, my God. Is that the latest in Kunoichi mission fashion that you're wearing? You're so lucky. How did you get it? You'll let me borrow that, right? Sakura spoke without breathing as she looked at the suit from all directions before she grabbed the blonde by the shoulders and shook her wildly. Naruto's trance ended right when the hands landed on her shoulder. She didn't have time to say anything before the shaking started. And once it began, it was so violent that she wasn't able to say or do a thing. With her head flying back and forth like that though, it could be taken as a nod. Which was why Sakura stopped shaking the girl as she shut her eyes and bent backwards slightly in a, "This is so awesome" pose. Cha! I can't wait to show Ino Pig. She'll be so jealous. Hey hey hey. Naruto suddenly shrieked. The pink-haired girl paused as she looked at the blonde. Can't I borrow it now, Naruto-chan? Sakura pleaded. I'm still wearing it, Sakura-chan. The blonde shouted as she struggled to stay out of her birthday suit. Sakura was suddenly shoved aside as Naruto was swept into another large hug. I met Tsunade-sama, again. How lucky am I to see her more than once in my lifetime. I see the hag 3 times every day, the blonde girl boredly mumbled into the older girl's shoulder. She was suddenly hauled into the air. The blonde yelled as she sounded her surprise. And Tenten used that as her cue to speak. When we get back, you will be my training partner, she said with a twitching eyebrow and a large scary grin. Okay Tenten-chan. Can you let me down now? The struggling girl asked. You misunderstand. You will be my training partner, the weapons mistress repeated. I already said yes, the blonde girl said as she tried to break free from Tenten's grip. Tenten looked helplessly at Sakura with a, how stupid is he, look. Sakura stopped gaping to say, actually. Tenten gave her another look that said, ha ha ha. Tell me another one. Sakura covered her face with her hands. She started to shake. The two watched her worriedly before they realized that the pink-haired girl was laughing. Ha ha ha, it's true. You have the world's first boneheaded girl in your hands. Hey, Naruto shouted in outrage. Too bad you can't fix the problem the same way would with a boy, Sakura said with a large smirk. The weapons mistress made a thoughtful sound. Well, it's a good thing I don't use the normal way to fix this then. Tenten said as she suddenly threw the blonde to the ground. Neji suddenly shivered in his hospital bed. He said a quick prayer for whatever boy Tenten was harassing this time. Naruto found herself hanging upside down from a tree, half a kilometer away from Tsunade's prison, with a rope tied around her ankle. Now then, Blondie, since you're so thick that you don't understand, I'll have to show ya what I mean when I say training. Naruto shrieked as she swung out of the way of a horrendously fast kunai. You almost hit me, she complained. That's the idea. I practice my aim and you practice your dodging, Tenten said in a matter-of-fact voice. What? Naruto shouted as she flailed her arms wildly and struggled to pull herself up so that she could pull her ankle out of the rope and run for it. Here goes, Tenten said as she reared back and threw without aiming, counting on her 100% accuracy to finish the job. Naruto shrieked as she flung herself out of the way of the kunai. It missed her waist by centimeters. Incidentally, she lost her grip on her ankle and fell upside down again. Thankfully, her suit was skin-tight, so she didn't have to deal with the bottom of her shirt flipping over her head like a t-shirt would. Oh, you're good, Tenten complimented as she pulled out a scroll. One with many weapons contained within. It wasn't her best weapon scroll, but she wanted to see how the blonde would fare against it. Sakura-chan, help. She's trying to kill me. Naruto cried. The pink-haired girl stepped forward. Hey, Tenten, she said quietly as she put a hand on the older girl's shoulder. Tenten immediately put away the scroll as she turned to look at Sakura. She must have known what Sakura intended to do because there was a large rope in her hands. Yes, the weapons mistress asked as she started to tie a few knots while looking the pink-haired girl up and down. Oh, nothing. Nothing at all, Sakura said with a weak smile as she turned around. Naruto flailed wildly again. Where are you going, Sakura-chan? Save me. I'll even give you my clothes right now. Ha ha ha, you're so funny, Naruto. Hey, listen, I'll go ahead and wait for you at the front gate. Come over when you're ready, Sakura said with a nervous chuckle before continuing her hurried walk away. Just before the trees hid her from view, there was a poof as a log suddenly replaced her. So what was your answer again? Tenten asked as she turned back to the blonde and carelessly tossed the knotted rope aside before pulling out a triplet of kunai. No, Naruto shouted before she squealed and swung herself to the side. Of the 3 kunai, only one managed to get close enough to put a small hole in the girl's skin-tight pants. Wow, you're really good at this. Now you HAVETA be my training partner. Tenten excitedly said before she pulled out a throwing knife and flipped it so that she was now holding the blade between her fingers. Never. Naruto shouted as she pulled a kunai from her holster and defiantly swung at the rope around her ankle, not caring if she missed and took her foot instead. But then there was a crack and Naruto yelped as she bounced and missed both, the rope and her ankle, completely. She had no time to make a fuss about the miss because the branch holding her up chose that moment to break in half. Both girls watched in surprise when the branch, unsurprisingly, could not escape gravity. The blonde was soon doubled over as the heavy pole of wood landed right on her stomach. Naruto! Tenten shouted as she ran up to the limp blonde girl. She bent down to pick up an end of the branch. The shorter girl gave a small moan. Tenten blinked as she paused. What? Yes. Naruto moaned again. A confused look overcame the brown-haired girl's face. Yes. Yes. I'll train with you, Datbeo. The girl said with an angry glare. Get the stupid branch off of her. Tenten looked away, embarrassed. I was just kidding about that actually. The mission wasn't terribly difficult. Patrol the western border of Konoha. Report back immediately if there were any signs of suspicious activity. Because of their low rank, unless there was no choice, avoid engaging the enemy. It was a boring job, so one girl soon broke protocol to chat amiably with her teammates. Naruto and Sakura shivered and hugged each other tightly as they listened to Tenten's description of her latest technique idea. I'm telling you, if you want to catch a guy, ya need ta learn ta cook. And lemme tell ya, a su fu rei would be perfect. It's light and fluffy and easy ta make. But how do we go about making a su fu rei? It's a mystery. I've looked in every single cookbook that I could find, but none of 'em have the recipe. There was no reply as the other two looked at her in confusion and fear. Who am I kidding? You two probably don't know how to cook, Tenten said with a careless shrug. That rankled her, and Naruto let go of her teammate to shout. Hey, I can cook just fine. Really? Oh, that's right. Ramen, Tenten asked as she recalled a rumor that she had heard about Naruto. The blonde grinned and nodded. Of course. It's the food of the gods, yo. No, it isn't. Sakura suddenly shouted. As to Datbeo. Is not. You're just angry that you can't boil water. Can 2. Take a quarter liter of water and put into a large pot that's about 3 liters large. Place pot over a roaring fire and wait. Naruto recited from off the top of her head. No more. No more. Sakura suddenly shouted as she covered her ears and looked around nervously. Tenten looked impressed. Is that how it's done? You know so much about cooking, Naru-chan. Have you got a man in mind yet? What? Naruto asked as fear overwhelmed her righteous expression. The way a man's heart is through his stomach, Tenten recalled. You can cook, so you can easily catch whoever ya want. She sighed as a dreamy look appeared on her face. Must be nice. I don't wanna catch a man. Tenten perked up when she heard this. Don't worry. I'll find a man that even you can't say no to. Naruto opened her mouth to respond when the three were suddenly engulfed in darkness. What's going on? Sakura's voice asked for all 3 of them. It echoed around in the darkness. And then they heard it. Dobi. Echoed through the inky blackness. Sasuke. Naruto and Sakura shouted. Wait. Tenten ordered. Don't move. She immediately reached forward and caught someone's arm. However, the sound of pattering feet indicated that someone else was running away. She dearly hoped it was the one responsible for this darkness. Her hopes were dashed when Naruto let out a shout. Sasuke, where are you, Tem? Her voice faded as she became more distant. Tenten bit her lip as she felt around and cautiously made her way after her wayward teammate. She kept a firm grip on Sakura's arm, not wanting any more of her group to wander off. Dash. Naruto snapped awake. What happened? She asked to nobody. You tell me, growled an unknown voice. Naruto immediately turned to look at the speaker. She found a red-haired man with red eyes leaning against the tree with a red cape ruffling dramatically behind him. She blinked her eyes rapidly before she rubbed them hard. No, there was definitely a spiked collar with a red band and clothing as red as the other things. The sheer amount of red hurt. If it weren't for his black gloves and large black fox ears, she would have been forced to hurt him after blindfolding. Wait. Large black fox ears. A gust of wind suddenly caused the man's cape to flap dramatically. She blinked again when she saw a bunch of red bushy tail underneath with a white tip on the ends. You. The girl shouted as she stood and pointed. He looked curiously at her. Are you? The girl started to shout before her voice faded and her finger fell. She looked downward in thought. After a minute, her head suddenly snapped up and she pointed again. He looked expectantly at her. Are you? A confused expression appeared on her face and her finger fell once again as she looked down and glared at the ground, as if blaming it for her loss of memory. Her head finally snapped up again. The man was still waiting. Who are you? The girl shouted as she hugged herself and shrunk back. The man fell over. Pulling himself to his feet, he sighed before a dramatic wind ruffled his cape and hair. I used to be the Lord of Demons. I have slaughtered many, destroyed even more. In my prime, my head rose above the clouds, the man said with a low melodious tone of voice. He looked up to see if the girl was still paying attention. The girl was staring blankly at a large but rather bland-looking rock that was nearby. Damn it, girl, the man said as he reached forward to shake her. Right before he touched her, the girl blinked before she leapt back. I'm sorry, she yelped. I wasn't listening. Who were you again? Fool, I'm the demon fox that terrorized your puny village 12 years ago. She continued to stare blankly at him. Not understanding. Gritting his teeth, he opened his mouth to shout, Q. Wait, I know who you are now. The blonde girl said as she held a small hand in front of his face. Let's see, Demon Fox, 12 years ago. I'm 12 now, so it had to have happened the same year I was born. 12 years ago the Demon Fox attacked my village. She suddenly looked up. The fox man eagerly awaited her answer. You're the old hag in disguise. The blonde shouted loudly. She was suddenly screaming when the man grabbed her in a headlock and started punching her on the top of her head. It's Kyuubi, you idiotic monkey. Q. Bye. After several knocks, the man stopped relieving his stress and let her go. He quickly shook his hand behind his back. Are you really the Kyuubi? The man shrugged. Not really. I'm all that managed to escape from that death trap in your stomach. And even then, Kyuubi wasn't my real name. But to make it simple for you monkeys, it will have to do. So you are, the fox. Yes, the man breathed out in annoyance. Naruto suddenly glared angrily. Get lost, Tem, I never want to see you again. Do you think I want to? I can't, brat. He suddenly reached up and pulled his neckpiece forward to show her, this collar binds me to you. Take it off then. Naruto huffed. Don't you think that I've tried? The man asked. The only way for me to get it off is for you to pull it off. Quote. Naruto gaped speechlessly at the man. Well, aren't you going to take it off? No way. The girl shouted as she crossed her arms and glared stubbornly at him. The two stopped glaring at each other when Naruto suddenly turned to the side. Kyuubi looked but didn't see anything. Come out where I can see you. Naruto suddenly shouted as she pointed her kunai at a random tree trunk. Clapping was heard as a raven-haired boy stepped out from behind the tree. Che. So you saw me. Kyuubi's eyes widened. Ilu, he started to say. Sasuke. Naruto shouted as the kunai twirled angrily in her grip. She tensed up and prepared to charge. The Uchiha turned to her disinterestedly. Who are you, weakling? Naruto paused in surprise before she straightened up. Naruto. Naruto. You're rather ugly now, the black-haired boy calmly said. Because of you, I'm a girl now. She cried as her grip tightened around her kunai and she bent over to punch the ground. What? Sasuke asked, his eyes widening. He looked the girl over carefully before he took a step forward and looked at the red-haired man sitting on a stump near her. I'll be taking the loser. Go ahead, Kyuubi said as he pulled out a rope from nowhere. Kyuubi, you beep beep, Naruto roared as she suddenly found herself bound tightly and unable to move. Sasuke was brave. He was very brave. The profanity coming from the blonde's mouth that could corrupt children and make the fox next to her shrink back in fear wasn't enough to stop him from coming closer. He paused in front of the bound girl before he brought his face forward. Dobi. No. Get away. Naruto shrieked. You're mine, he whispered, his nose practically touching hers. Sasuke suddenly cracked like a rock breaking a mirror. Before anyone could react, he shattered. A strong wind suddenly kicked up and blew away the broken fragments. The red-haired man laughed uproariously as the fragments faded away. Ha ha ha, brat. You fell for an illusion. You monkeys are so dumb sometimes. It looked so fake that even a pigeon wouldn't have crapped on it. There was no reply. The smirk dropped off of the fox's face. Brat. Naruto limply fell over. Now then. The fox was fast. Very fast. He was also plenty close enough. So why did he just stand there and watch her fall? Demons don't do chivalrous. He growled as he scanned his surroundings. He hated being wrong. It was embarrassing as hell. There. That tree. He leapt for it. Beep, the loud curse ripped through the air, causing several birds to fly leap from the trees in fright. On a somewhat related note, Tsunade poured a saucer of sake without spilling it, indicating that the loud shout didn't quite reach the tower. Kyuubi returned to his first spot several moments later where he froze and stared at the spot where the brat's body was supposed to be. It was gone. He had been tricked again and now he was pissed beyond belief. Sniffing the air, he immediately leapt forward. Minutes later, the fox struck. With one great leap, he swung his foot and kicked the missing nin in the back of the head. Naruto's body flew limply through the air as the man holding her lost his grip. Without anyone to keep her above the branches, she descended rapidly before landing in a convenient bush. There were no loud curses from being manhandled like that, she was still unconscious. The missing nin used his freed hands to acrobatically grab onto a branch and swing around. The result of this action was that his feet landed heavily on the branch he was grasping onto. Who are you? The man with Kumo's forehead protector demanded fearfully. Kyuubi landed on the same branch right after the man said this. He grinned when he saw his victim shrink back. Releasing a giant aura of killing intent to freeze the man in place, he slowly took a step forward. Your worst nightmare. He rumbled as he placed a hand on his hilt. Using his other hand to brace the sheath, he pulled. Chink. The two stopped staring at each other to look down at the sword in the fox man's grip. Instead of coming out in one smooth flowing motion, the sword remained in the sheath and refused to budge. It was stuck. Muttering something that sounded like, stupid legendary sword, and, getting sword training after this, the man in red pushed the sword back into the hilt and tried to pull it out once more. Chink. Die. The missing nin shouted as he took advantage of the situation and thrust forward with a dagger. Chink. Goddammit. Kyuubi cried as he stopped trying to pull out the sword in favor of ripping the sheath off of his belt and swinging it like a bat. Specks of spit flew from the cloud nin's mouth as he crumpled forward when the sheath swung forward at an impossibly fast speed and struck him in the gut. And then Newton's third law of motion came into play as the missing nin went soaring backwards. Gravity soon took over and he descended towards the ground as the world turned black. The fox wiped his face in disgust before leaping after the body. Tenten and Sakura finally entered the clearing. Naruto. They both shouted when they saw the small body entangled in the large bush. They worked together to pull her out. Once the ramen lover was free, they raced her back to Konoha. The urgency was so dire that no one stopped them at the gates. Hidden by the shadows, Kyuubi leaned against a thick tree trunk as he watched the two girls work to free the yellow-haired one. When they finally disappeared, he looked down. Now then, you will tell me what you did to the brat, punk, he said as he ground his foot into the man's chest. The unconscious beat-up nin beneath him obviously said nothing. 2. Shizune sat next to the bed, reading up on a new fashion trends, then looking at the pale girl to her side. She was just reading looking over a popular new sleeveless style that was both modest and immodest when a hoarse voice filled the silence. Where am I? Shizune was soon out of the room and dashing down the hallway shouting, Tsunade-sama, she's awake. The doorframe cracked as Tsunade almost ran by the room before she caught herself. She pulled herself into Naruto's room and gasped. Glazed blue eyes stared quietly at her. The only hint of life in them was a dim spark that was struggling to stay alive. In Orochimaru's village, Sasuke meditated, completely unaware of current happenings in Konoha. Omake. Ichi. Skuld stopped to stare at an odd fish squirming on ice. She was walking away soon after, a bored look on her face. She'd seen weirder. The large wish-granting goldfish cried as it watched its potential savior leave without a second thought. Then, a giant knife suddenly flashed menacingly above it. No, I'll grant you a real wish if you let me go, it flopped and begged. No more wishes, the burly fisherman shouted as he grabbed the tail of the helpless fish and threw it upon the chopping block. The knife came down and went thunk as it embedded itself in the chopping block. But the fish wasn't there anymore. Fishy-san. A small child shouted as he dug a long trench through the earth as he dragged the fish away with a hand on the fish's tailfin and the rest of the fish's tail held securely under his arm. The fact that he could accomplish this feat when the fish was easily twice his size was the weird part. The fisherman shouted angrily as he chased after the boy with his knife upraised and gleaming wildly in the sun. However, the crowd wasn't going to let a man run through the streets with a knife in the air. Several members shouted loudly, and soon the fisherman was dog-piled by a team of patrol nin dressed in heavy padding and helmets. They made it their mission to protect the citizens of Konoha from butchers with killing intent. My wish has been granted, the fish tearfully cried before it yelped in pain as its head struck a rock. This happened several more times before it was rather hard to tell whether the fish was crying from happiness or pain. The moral of the story. If it's random, it fits anywhere. That, or the author is a twit. Since I'm the author and I don't like being called a twit, I blame my co-author. Hey. Character sheet. Tenten. I gave Tenten an accent. When she speaks slowly, everything comes out clearly except for, 2. When she says things quickly, 2 becomes ta. Some ing words become in. Some you become ya. There are some other shortenings. Keep in mind that I didn't give Tenten a southern accent. It just sorta sounds like it from time to time. She's a casual, friendly speaker. Did you know? Tenten wasn't joking when she said that she was good at games requiring guessing. Kyuubi. Kyuubi is also not quite right. If you really must know, I designed him based on Orphan. In other words, he's a reluctant hero. The only one he'll really protect is Naruto. He's good at detecting illusions. He's also good at fighting. Strong and fast, he brawls but he has the physical attributes to back it up. Did you know? When referring to mankind, he'll use the term monkey. Did you know? Many years of living and Kyuubi can't use a sword to save his life. Special note. There is only one Kyuubi. The red-headed woman in Lee's chapter is thus not Kyuubi. And no, that soaking wet girl hollering about stinking wet countries is not my co-author. Sakura. The one character who I can't pin down. She's the bad but not bad guy. I guess you could say she's the most normal girl. Did you know? Ino isn't the only one that keeps up with the latest trends. Naruto, our protagonist who has tons of misfortune heaped upon her. Silly and naive. Cute. Master cook. The list goes on and I don't feel like typing it up right now. Did you know? Naruto doesn't actually have dodos floating around her brain. She's smart but her brain works rather differently from others. Naruto woke up. She turned to the right and saw a familiar face sitting right next to her. Sasuke. She shouted as she tried to move, however she soon discovered that she was tied up tight. You bastard. Let me go. Shing. That was the sound of a kunai coming out from its holster. It glinted madly under the dim light. You know, I was just kidding. You can keep me tied up. Put the kunai away please. Naruto asked with a weak chuckle. Of course she wasn't pleading. Instead of listening, the raven-haired boy swung downwards. There was a shrill scream. From down in the dungeons. It was actually too faint to hear, but just because no one was around to hear it doesn't mean there wasn't a scream. There was also a tearing sound. This sound was closer to the scene and far less hair-raising. It was made by a kunai slicing through the ropes that bound Naruto in place. They fell away from the terrified girl. Thanks, Naruto said gratefully when she finally started moving again. She rubbed her arms to restore circulation. Where am I? Otogakure, came the short reply. Naruto cried. This is my room, Sasuke continued before he stood up. Dobi, I'm going to change you back to a guy. Naruto unintelligibly repeated. However, there was a tone of hope in her voice. Instead of explaining, Sasuke snapped his fingers and a large plume of smoke erupted in the spot where Naruto stood, concealing her completely from view. When the smoke cleared, Naruto appeared a bit taller and far less delicate. The blonde quickly checked himself over before he looked up happily. Sasuke, I knew you could do it. I'm going to cook dinner for you as thanks. Where's the kitchen? Sasuke wordlessly pointed out of the room, and Naruto dashed out. It took him little time to be acquainted with the rather dimly lit kitchen. It looked sinister and evil, but the ingredients that he found were very fresh. Almost like they were just picked. As Naruto hummed happily at a kitchen counter, a shadow slowly crept up behind him. The scene suddenly goes black. Sasuke, what are you know? That can't go in there. Aye. The bed creaked loudly as a blonde girl sat up with a gasp. As she sat there in the darkness panting heavily as she put a hand to her sweat-covered forehead while the other one tightly clutched her blanket for comfort. The same nightmare for the past 3 days, the last thing that she could remember was Sasuke tossing sliced eggplant into the large bubbling pot. The soup was ruined before she had a chance to try it. Sasuke, baka. She quietly whispered as her hand fell into her lap and her bangs shadowed her face. 3 days earlier. Nightmare Jutsu, the Cloud Nin finally groaned out before he was suddenly hauled into the air and thrown into a clearing. Kyuubi ran off. Moments later, a Konoha patrol happened upon the beaten man. Look, a missing nin. One member of the patrol shouted. Way to state the obvious, Bazo, another group member said as they promptly tied up the criminal and returned back to Konoha, after they finished their patrol route. In other words, if they found themselves in a spot of trouble, they could always throw their prisoner into the line of fire. If their prisoner somehow managed to survive their return trip to Konoha, then they could deliver him to intelligence for interrogation. Kyuubi tended to be a bit cruel when he was stressed. Neji stood in front of the Hokage with a stern look on his face as he waited patiently. Inwardly, he was confused. He was just out of the hospital and there was a mission already available for him. Your mission was originally AD rank, but given the number of failures, I believe it should be an S rank mission. Tsunade said as she sat up slightly and shuffled a stack of papers before she leaned forward again to continue. However, C rank is the best I can designate it because the mission itself will not take place outside of our village's borders. Neji nodded. He understood so far. You will have to accomplish this mission solo. I would have sent your team to accompany you, but Tenten-san and Lee-san are currently out of action. As for having another team to help out, there isn't enough time for you to develop teamwork with them. Interference from the others would unnecessarily complicate this mission. Yes, Hokage-sama, Neji replied. I'll be brief, your mission is to get Naruto out of her apartment. Neji blinked in confusion. Retrieve Naruto from her apartment? He rephrased slightly, asking for clarification on the odd mission and Naruto's odd gender. Instead of answering, Tsunade fixed him with a glare before saying, "Don't interrupt." Neji remained silent, allowing Tsunade to continue with, "Neji, I'm counting on you to succeed," she said as she slid a folder forward for him to take. The Hyuga prodigy paused before he picked it up and briefly scrolled through it. 5 teams sent out, all failed. 3 Genin teams, 2 Chunin. Every one of them returned alive but with injuries ranging from mild to severe. The 5th really wasn't joking. He looked up. Why me? None of the teams that I sent out before had a member that possessed the Byakugan. All they could tell me was that they couldn't find Naruto and that a red blur attacked them while they searched. With your bloodline, you should be able to discover where Naruto is hiding as well as identify what the red blur is, Tsunade replied as she subtly closed a half-open drawer. No, she wasn't trying to hide a dartboard with several profile pictures pasted on the front. Her subtle motion wasn't lost on the young Hyuga. He looked skeptically at the blonde woman. Naruto was probably late for a meeting and the Hokage needed someone to wake him up. He straightened up and asked, "Permission to leave?" "Not just yet," Tsunade said as she held something up. Quote. Neji gazed at it impassively for a moment before he turned and walked out with a scowl on his face. Tsunade set down the nurse outfit. Granted it wasn't sized for him, but there was a click, and then a door swung in. Neji stepped into the living room and walked towards a closed door without hesitating. He quickly unlocked it and stepped into the bedroom. There was a lump on the bed hidden beneath the blankets. "Naruto, get up," Neji demanded. When there was no reply, he repeated it again before he impatiently stepped up to the lump. "Get up," Neji irritatedly said a third time as he pulled the covers off. His eyes widened when all he found was a pillow. He irritatedly formed several hand seals. Byakugan. Looking around the room, Neji immediately realized that she wasn't on this floor, nor on the floor above him. He looked downwards. There was someone hiding down one. She was the only occupant in this entire apartment. Maybe the girl knew where Naruto was hiding. He stood up and started to walk out, only to leap back as a foot almost took his head off. "Who are you?" Neji growled at the newcomer. "Kyuubi no Yoko," the man bluntly said before his eyes narrowed. "I will not let you pass." Neji was very surprised to hear a man introduce himself as one of Konoha's historical nemesis. When it finally occurred to him to move, he didn't have enough time to dodge the follow-up hit. He crashed heavily against the far wall. Quickly pushing himself up off of the floor, he jumped forward to retaliate. He missed. He felt several strikes hit his arm and back as punishment. Stumbling forward slightly, Neji immediately swung around. "You are within the range of my divination," he shouted. Except he had no time to follow through before he was seized and thrown into another wall. This continued for a moment longer, Neji taking several hits, but unable to land a single hit on his opponent. It was obvious that he was outmatched. The man's reach and speed advantage were too great for him to overcome. However, he soon noticed something was very strange about the way the man fought. After the next wave of attacks, Neji deliberately left his neck exposed. Instead of taking the bait, the man grabbed the Hyuga's arm and proceeded to throw him at the bed. Neji nimbly rolled off the bed and gracefully landed on the floor. He understood now, the man wasn't trying to kill him. He was just keeping him away. The two eyed each other warily before Neji turned. The glass shattered as he leapt right out the window. As he dashed down the wall toward a window that led to the floor below, he heard a curse from behind him. Right when he touched the glass, he saw something move from the other side of the glass. His eyes widened in surprise. It was a trap. In his panic, he lost control of the chakra, keeping him glued to the wall. There was a brief shockwave from under him, and then a large crater formed in the wall as Neji was forcefully ejected from the vertical surface. Twisting gracefully in midair so that he was oriented in a way to soften his landing, Neji watched with wide eyes as the glass shattered and a large tongue of fire caught his unfortunate opponent in midair. There was a loud scream as the fire covered the man. A body belly flopped on the ground, creating a small steaming crater and dent before it jumped to its feet and ran off hollering with arms waving wildly high in the air. Neji stared at the scene in consternation. From his viewpoint, the man looked unhurt even after being torched like that. After staring at the broken window for a moment longer, he turned to find the entrance to the apartment. This time, he arrived at the entrance to the apartment containing the unknown girl. It was easy to unlock the door since it wasn't locked. Turning the knob clockwise, Neji pushed the door in slightly. Then a click suddenly echoed in the hallway. Neji immediately pulled the door shut and ducked right as a kunai pierced right through the steel of the closed door and embedded itself in the opposing wall. Unfortunately, that kept him in place long enough for another ominous click to be heard. Using his bloodline, Neji immediately recognized the trap hidden behind the door. There was no time to ask who could possibly have the bright idea of raying a flame-throwing trap indoors. It's probably the girl. She's the only one here, he frantically thought before he spotted what he was looking for. Neji immediately kicked the door in, ripping it off of its hinges before shoving his fingers into the now exposed feeder lines. They split in half, dousing him in a putrid-smelling oil. But without its fuel, the flame trap would not be able to activate. Breathing a sigh of relief, Neji made his way into the apartment, only to leap out again when he heard a click. Thunk. There was a kunai embedded in the spot where he had stood moments before. Several more clicks sounded throughout the room and kunais suddenly started flying everywhere. Neji quickly pressed himself against the wall next to the door as several kunai shot out through the open doorway. The noise gradually died down. Neji peered in. He breathed a sigh of relief when there were no clicks when his face entered the room. He had only taken a few steps inside when another set of traps suddenly sounded. Now, Neji was both irritated and amused. He was definitely going to ask the girl how she managed to rig traps that he couldn't spot. But first, Kaden, Neji shouted as he quickly whirled around and used the Hyuga's ultimate defense. Several of the kunai flew away, but more continued to stream in as click after click continued to sound. Neji was soon growling as he furiously wondered who had the money to obtain this many weapons. He couldn't hold the defense up forever, and soon he was slowing from exhaustion. Something finally pierced through his defense and struck him on the head, knocking him out of his spin and onto the floor. Stars flashed in his vision as he strained to use his bloodline to see what hit him. A butter knife. When a spoon took that moment to strike his back, there was no doubt about it. Neji was definitely going to throw the girl into this room after he was done questioning her. Neji slowly advanced, pausing occasionally to block the silverware that continued to fly in from all over. After batting away a rogue fork several steps away from the bedroom door, Neji decided that he had enough and dashed forward. He failed to see the thick black wire in his path, but he definitely heard the ominous click as he tripped on it. Neji groaned as the floor in front of him fell away with a FWUMP and he started to dive headfirst into a large pit. Inside were a multitude of bloody pikes pointed upwards, and numerous skeletons that had been skewered by them. So this was his fate. If he had to die trying to fight it, he could think of better ways. But given what he had, he started to spin in midair as he prepared to defend himself using Kaden. But without a solid foothold, he couldn't rotate fast enough before he fell on the pikes. A loud crack filled the air. Neji suddenly found his descent arrested as someone seized the back of his shirt and kicked off the wall of the pit. Together the two flew back up and out of the pit. They landed lightly on the edge farthest from the bedroom door. Behind them, now devoid of victims, the pit closed, sealing itself away. Neji was dumped unceremoniously to the floor. Looking up, he realized that his savior was the red-haired man that he fought earlier. "Why did you save me?" Neji found himself asking as he pushed himself up. "You came farther than the others, kid. If there's anyone that can break her out of this mood, I think you can." Neji looked at the man with narrowed eyes. "It was you that stopped the others, weren't you?" "Hey, you know me too well, kid," the red-haired man said sheepishly. Neji looked at the innocent-looking bedroom door before he reached up and caught a spoon. "How do we cross the pit and open her door? If it were me, I'd smoke her out." "What? Kitsune-bai," the red-haired man shouted before he turned to the door, put his palms together and spewed out a huge blue fire. Neji gaped in shock for a moment. "Weren't you afraid of fire?" Neji demanded. "Of course no, wait." The man's defensive growl became one of surprise when he saw Neji turn and leap right over the pit and into the flames. Didn't the boy know that he was covered in oil? Neji did, but that wasn't going to stop him from saving a friend. He crashed into the bedroom door with such force that it splintered slightly as it burst open. Neji tumbled into the room before he rolled to put out the flames on him. But the blue fire stubbornly clung to him. It took several seconds before he realized that the flames on him weren't hot. "It was all an illusion, kid," the Kyuubi said with a devilish smirk as he walked in. "Go away," came a loud shriek. Neji looked over and his eyes immediately widened. Hokage-sama wasn't kidding about Naruto's gender either. Together, the two watched Naruto awkwardly fall out of bed before she made her way to the corner to hide. "Remove this first and I will," the man replied as he stepped forward and pointed at the collar. "No, oh," Naruto stammered to the man. Kyuubi took a step forward menacingly. That was all that he needed. "Oh, okay," the girl quickly said as she changed her mind. The man bent over and she reached her small hands around his neck. "I'm sorry, it won't come off," Naruto said after several vain tugs. She tried several more times, becoming more and more jittery with every failure before she finally shrieked and covered her head. I'm sorry. Don't hurt me." The red-haired man had a brief look of disgust on his face as he turned and stood up. He left the room without a word. Neji looked at the cowering blonde in the corner as a look of disgust appearing on his own face as well. He was defeated by this. Fighting the bile rising in his throat, he took a step forward. "Naruto, Hoka, go away." She drew further within herself. "Hokage-sama has requested that I bring you to her office," he said again as she said nothing and shrunk away. I'm sorry. I can't. Naruto. Go away. Leave me alone." The girl cried irrationally. "Fight me," Neji finally said. "Fight me and I will leave." Fine," the girl said as she slowly stood up and assumed a combat stance. He pierced through her weak guard with little effort. She struck the wall before she collapsed on the floor. "Get up," Neji ordered. "Oh, okay," the girl said as she staggered to her feet. Neji wasted little time in charging forward. The girl went crashing into the bed before she bounced off and dashed the back of her head against the drawer. She fell to the floor again. "Goddamn Naruto," Neji cursed as he picked her up. She weakly looked at him with almost closed eyes. He managed to catch a glimpse of the resigned look within them before they finally closed and her body went limp. Naruto slowly woke up to a tinge of pain in her side and her head. When she opened her eyes, she realized that there was a haze of white floating in front of her. It moved when she moved and she soon realized that it was a. "You look stunning, brat," the Hokage said with an appraising glance. Was the quiet reply. "Everyone's ready, Tsunade-sama," Shizune said as she entered the room with a bouquet of roses. 1. "Very well. Explain things to the lucky one while I go take my place," Tsunade said as she stepped from the room. "Congratulations, Naruto," Shizune said with a large smile on her face as she shoved the large bouquet into Naruto's hands. What's going on? Naruto weakly asked Tsunade's apprentice as she held the. You're getting married. Married. To Neji. Neji. Yes. It's Hyuga tradition. It's customary if a strong Hyuga defeats an equally strong partner, they would get married. But I lost. Badly. Yes you did. But you defeated him in the Chunin exams. That's when they acknowledge your strength. I'm not that strong anymore, the blonde girl whined. Quote. Shizune had nothing to say. Hinata walked in. Anyo, the wedding is about to start. Come on, Shizune said as she reached over and took Naruto's hand. The girl didn't protest as she was led outside. We are gathered here today to witness the holy matrimony between Neji Hyuga and Naruto Uzumaki. Is there anyone that wishes to protest this arrangement? A small voice rang from the crowd. I do. There were several gasps. Hyuga Hanabi, you wish to protest against Hyuga Neji's marriage? I do. Hanabi calmly repeated. Do you wish to state a reason? No. In truth, she didn't have a real reason. She had been reading through a tome of Hyuga traditions the other day and came upon one where contests could be held at a wedding. Since she was getting bored, why not? What's going on? Someone whispered. A main family member is protesting the arrangement. His uncle replied. What's so special about that? Because a branch member is being married, if a main branch member protests the arrangement, Hyuga tradition dictates that a series of contests must be held to determine which of the three the gods favor today. 3. Naruto, Neji, or Hanabi-sama. Why Naruto? If Naruto won, the wedding would be cancelled because the gods have decided that today would not be a good day for her to marry. What happens if Hanabi-sama wins? Well, actually, I'm not sure about that one. If tradition applied, the results would be really weird. The first asked, however his partner had already turned back to watch. Very well then. Because the rules are stringent on this matter, we will hold 3 contests to see which candidate the gods will favor. Naruto-san, Neji-san, or Hanabi-san. The first contest will be to draw straws. This is a test to see whose soul the gods favor today. Whoever has the favored spirit will win by drawing the short straw. Use of the Hyuga bloodline limit is forbidden for this round, both from the contestants and from the spectators. Tsunade announced before she turned and whispered, I'll place 100 ryo on Neji's victory. Noted. A seedy-looking Hyuga said before he took the bill. Hinata held out the 3 straws for the contestants to take. The 2 Hyuga children pulled out their straws without hesitation. That left Naruto to slowly pull out her own. All 3 presented what they were holding. Tsunade cursed. It appears that Naruto Uzumaki has won this round. Hokage-sama, I protest. Hanabi quietly said. I protest as well, Neji added. What are they doing? Someone else from the crowd whispered. If the Hokage allows the protests, the results of the contest will be thrown out and a rematch will be declared, came the reply from her sister. Oh, she allowed it all right. She would have been rubbing her hands together and cackling madly if it weren't for the fact that the Hokage's image had to be maintained. Round 2. Tsunade shouted before she turned and whispered, I'll place 50 ryo on Hanabi's victory. Noted. Came an equally quiet voice as money exchanged hands. The 3 contestants pulled the straws from Hinata's grasp. Tsunade cursed again. Naruto Uzumaki has won this round. Hokage-sama, I protest. The cycle continued. Naruto continued to win. Round 15. Tsunade shouted weakly. The 3 prepared to draw again. Except Hiyashi stepped forward, took the 3 straws from Hinata's hand, and pushed her aside. He quickly selected the short straw and let it fall to the ground before he put a long straw into the pile. He showed the 3 long straws to the entire crowd before he glared at the 3. Draw. The 3 gulped. Who was going to question the stupidity of the Hyuga head's action? Naruto stepped forward and pulled one out first. The other 2 soon followed. When it came time to show what they had pulled, Everyone immediately gaped at the straw in Naruto's hand. They quickly looked down at the one lying on the ground. Both were short. Quote. Hanabi glared at the winning straw before she turned around. Hokage-sama, she started to say before a large hand covered her mouth. Tsunade slowly pulled her hand away. It was obvious who won this round. Naruto had a small smile on her face as she looked at the straw in her hand. The second contest will be of the mind. Whoever the gods do not favor will make a serious tactical mistake in this contest. Because of Naruto Uzumaki's unnatural victory in the last contest, she will be banned from this round. Tsunade paused for a moment to hear the outraged outburst. There was none. Naruto continued to stare depressingly down at the ground. Tsunade turned away to continue. The game selected will be Go. She immediately turned and whispered, I'll place 100 Ryo on Neji's victory. I'd hate to say this, but he's not going to win, Tenten quietly replied as she hesitantly took the money. Tsunade instantly felt her money flutter away. That's ridiculous. Neji is the reigning champion of the annual Go tournament for 3 years now, a branch member nearby snorted. He also added 100 Ryo to Neji's name. The Hokage perked up a little when she heard this. The feeling that she had where her money was soaring far, far away disappeared. He would be third if Shikaku and Shikamaru joined, but those two Naras are far too lazy, another branch member added as he slapped 150 Ryo into Tenten's hand. Neji, he replied before he disappeared into the crowd. Tsunade cackled mentally. With these claims, there was no way that she could lose. Hiyashi stepped up. Hanabi, he said while giving Tenten 10 Ryo. He had no further comments as he stepped back to watch the game begin. The small amount exchanged wasn't lost on Tsunade. Way to cheer on your daughter Hyuga-san, she thought with a tremendous mental smirk. Neji looked skeptically at Hanabi. Do you even know how to play Go? Hanabi smirked before saying, of course. Her smirk twitched slightly, as if she was lying through her teeth. Neji had his own smirk when he saw this. I'll go easy on you, he said. In other words, he was going to make it a quick game so that she didn't suffer much. Hanabi hesitantly nodded before she sat down at her place at the table. How do you play Go? A depressed Naruto heard a random bystander quietly ask. The goal of the game is to capture and hold more territory than your opponent by the end of the game. Once there is no empty land to claim, you must struggle with your opponent for more territory. To do this, you must surround your opponent's unprotected pieces to capture them while keeping your own pieces from being surrounded, his cousin replied. Oh, who's winning? The same bystander finally asked after some time. Neji. Why? Hanabi-sama has a large loop that she's almost completed. That's all she has. The larger the loop that you manage to complete, the more territory and pieces you can capture at once, but you sacrifice defense. It is an incredibly risky offense, since even one piece from your opponent can defeat the strategy and cost you the game. Neji was having no problems keeping Hanabi from completing the loop as he continued to place pieces in her path that continually forced her to go around. In short, he was dominating the playing field and the game would be over soon. So when Hanabi set down her next piece, Neji's jaw dropped. Hanabi started to pick up the large group of black stones that she had ringed. She carelessly tossed the captured pieces to the side. There was no doubt about it. He lost. He put down his next piece as he continued to fight. Believe in yourself and, no matter how dire, the game will return to your favor. It was over in minutes. The winner of this match, Hanabi Hyuga. Tsunade announced as she crumpled the ticket in her hand. From nearby, Tenten was quietly saying to Hiyashi. Since the odds eventually stopped at 100 ta 1, and you gave 10 Ryo, your earnings comes out ta 1000 Ryo. Not bad. She said as she counted out 100 Ryo notes and handed them to the Hyuga head. We've challenged the soul and the mind. Now we shall see who the gods favor with a contest of the body. We will have a free-for-all battle between Naruto Uzumaki, Neji Hyuga, and Hanabi Hyuga. Whoever the gods favor will be able to defeat the other two. Aren't you going to bet? One Ryo on Naruto, Tsunade said as she glared at the seedy-looking man. Noted. He wrote something into a notebook. Cheapo, he muttered before he walked off. Tsunade growled. Right on the battlefield. How? Neji demanded as he glared at the shortest girl. He should have won. Hanabi had an enigmatic smirk on her face before she pointed to a pair of people conversing off to the side. The power of the Queen of Cheaters, one of them said. The Queen of. Neji thought for a moment before his eyes widened. Now that he remembered, there was one critical spot. One that was far from the battlefield. One that her white stone was not supposed to be occupying because he had a black stone there already. So you finally understand? Hanabi asked, the smirk remaining on her face. You cheated. I did. The small girl replied. The Hyuga prodigy frowned. I won't lose Naruto to your dishonorable ways. Why are you so determined to win? Hanabi asked curiously. Because Naruto is the best. Neji said with a grin. Naruto perked up slightly when she heard this. The best. Naruto can change others. She has that special ability. Hanabi scoffed. I have never heard of such a thing. Believe it or not, I've seen it happen. I look forward to seeing what she can do once she is Hokage. Her, Hokage? Hanabi asked as she skeptically turned to their downcast third opponent. The two watched as the blonde shook for a moment. They heard a sniffle. Thank you, Neji, came Naruto's soft smoky voice. She brought a hand up to wipe her eye before she raised her head and looked at Neji. The glaze that had covered her brilliant blue eyes had faded a little, and Neji couldn't help but smile. From the side, Hanabi saw the growing fire in the blonde girl's eyes as well. She still wasn't convinced that Naruto was going to be the best ninja in the village. Naruto suddenly glared at the Hyuga prodigy. But if you think I'm going to marry a guy, you're dead wrong. She threw the bouquet of roses aside as she moved into an aggressive brawling stance. We'll see who the gods favor then, Neji said lightly before he turned to Hanabi and got into a ready stance. Hanabi, I won't hold back. Even for you. Very well then, Hanabi said before she got into her own ready stance. All three were ready. Hajime, Tsunade shouted and the match began. Give up, Neji shouted as he pivoted and charged for Hanabi, his hands began to glow slightly. Since Hanabi was obviously the weakest, he could quickly remove her from the match, allowing him to focus on defeating Naruto. Neji suddenly disappeared from the field for a brief moment. He reappeared right behind his unsuspecting black-haired opponent. His glowing palm flew downwards at the small girl's exposed back. Boom! A mushroom cloud appeared as dust and dirt and bits of grass flew everywhere from the explosion. A stray wind pushed the plume of smoke up and away. The crowd was speechless. Hanabi slowly turned around and caught sight of her father and sister staring at each other in surprise. Hiashi and Hinata then looked down at the battered body. Neji groaned weakly as the two pulled their palm off of his back. The two looked back at each other, and then, on some silent signal between the two of them, Hiashi calmly said for the both of them, Neji. I would appreciate it if you refrained from striking my daughter. Neji did not say a word, he had fallen unconscious. The two suddenly turned to a wide-eyed Naruto, who was in the middle of backing away slowly. The blonde girl froze like a deer caught in headlights. I wasn't going to hit her, yo, Naruto defended weakly. Hiashi and Hinata both looked at each other before they nodded. Naruto only had time to shriek once before. Boom. An even larger dust cloud mushroomed into the air. When the dust finally cleared, Hiashi turned and nodded to his daughter to let her know that it was her turn. My sister is not weak. I will not stand by while you mock her skills, Hinata sternly said as she and Hiashi frowned down at the twitching blonde. Hanabi watched the scene impassively before she turned when a large hand grabbed her thin arm. Tsunade raised the girl's arm into the air. The winner of these contests with 2 wins, Hanabi Hyuga. The traditional reward for the main branch member winning. They take the place of the branch member. The best part is that they don't need to dress up or anything. But Hanabi's age and gender made this an odd situation. Tsunade insisted that tradition be applied despite Hiyashi's stiff resistance. She somehow won in the end, but to explain how she pulled it off would take a while. To make it short, it was an epic battle of glares and stares. So a semi-recovered blonde stood at the altar in a dirty wedding dress with a bored-looking Hanabi right next to her. Neji was still unconscious. No one bothered to wake him up since it wasn't his show anymore. After declaring that the two married, Tsunade grinned before she said, "You may now kiss the bride." Hanabi took one look at her partner before a look of disgust overcame her face. "Do I have to?" she said. "Yes," Tsunade replied. "But she smells like bad milk," Hanabi complained. Naruto lost her sleepy look as she turned to glare at the younger girl. "I do not, you liar." "I'm not lying," the slightly shorter girl indignantly said. Tsunade started laughing. "Good show, brat. I formally declare this ceremony over. I'd like to see you in my office immediately." "This was all a sham?" Naruto quietly asked. "A pretty good one, don't you think?" "It wasn't cheap, but it's good to see you making progress. We'll have you back to your old self in no time," Tsunade said with a grin. "So I'm not married?" Naruto questioned. "Nope," the Hokage said as she held out a small scroll. "What's this?" Naruto asked as she took the proffered item. She opened it and her eyes widened. "I can't afford this," Naruto stated. "Not to worry, I still have that C-rank mission that I haven't paid you yet. I'll take the money from there," Tsunade said as she started rummaging through the piles of paper on her desk. "I don't remember completing any C-rank missions recently," the younger blonde commented. "You did," Tsunade absently replied as she continued to search. "No, I didn't. How about that mission with Haruno-san and Tenten-san?" Tsunade commented as she pulled out another small scroll. "Ah, maybe I did," the girl thoughtfully said. I take that back," Tsunade said after a moment. "What?" Naruto questioned. "Sorry, brat, but the patrol had to end early because they had to bring you back. That counts as a failure." "What?" Naruto shouted. She had failed a mission. "So then, I need you to cough up the cash from your savings." "What?" Naruto shouted. She still had to pay. "It's not like I'm going to pay for your next costume with my own wallet. Where's the irony in that?" "What?" Naruto shouted loudly. The old hag wanted to use the money for a dress. A vein popped up in Tsunade's forehead. "Shut up, brat," she shouted as she bopped the other blonde on the head. She held her fist up menacingly in case Naruto shouted, "What? One more time." "Ow, you old hag," Naruto shouted with fire in her eyes before she delivered a defiant one-finger salute. "You brat," Tsunade roared as she leapt over her desk to tackle the shorter blonde. Inwardly she was smiling. Naruto still had some ways to go, but the initial diagnosis indicated that she would eventually return to her perky self. Hanabi had heard of marriage. A ceremony that binds two people. She's also heard from some of the older girls that they would love to be married in a nice large ceremony. And she's heard from many old ladies how they lamented not being able to marry. She suddenly looked up and glared at the clerk behind the desk. He immediately stopped clearing his throat to grab her attention. I'm going to need your partner's signature before I can file this." "Fine," Hanabi calmly replied. "All right, please have him sign this," the clerk behind the desk said as he pushed forward a small signature form. Hanabi took it and looked it over for a moment before she turned to the clerk with a nod. "I will return tomorrow," she said as she walked out. She wasn't giving up the marriage. Omake. Ichi. Three girls sat around their table and stared intently at their cards. Actually, Tenten was staring rather intently at another player's cards. "Yes?" Hanabi asked smugly. "You have a royal flush, don't ya?" Tenten suddenly asked as she threw down her cards. She only had a pair of aces, one spade and one diamond. "Third game in a row, I'm just that lucky I guess," Hanabi bragged as she set down a royal flush of clubs with a flourish. Ah gee, who wins now? The blonde girl at the table spoke up. When the other two look at the third player, she put down a royal flush of hearts. Quote. From far, far away, someone was observing the game through a pair of binoculars. The queen of cheating, the mistress of predictions, and the goddess of luck. The three heroes of gambling, Neji monotoned as he set the binoculars down. Scary, isn't it? Kiba asked as he walked up and set down a briefcase with Konoha Trump emblazoned on the front. He took off his sunglasses and pulled out his own pair of binoculars to have a look. Omake. Ni. Kyuubi was just bumbling along one night when he accidentally stepped on a house and it exploded. Screaming, he leapt back, only to land on a group of nin. Well, that obviously didn't settle very well with them. From his height, Kyuubi wasn't able to see their eyes, but if he did, he would have seen several red-eyed nins. Huge gouts of fire immediately came at him from all over. Well, the giant fox wasn't going to let the flames hit him, so he started to dance around them. But realistically, dancing is just too refined a way to describe stomping on everything as the giant fireballs continued to strike his large rump. After hundreds more buildings exploded, many nin died, and the fox's nerves were shot from seeing all of that fire. A giant red frog appeared with a blonde-haired man standing on his head. The last thing that the fox thought before he was sucked into a child's stomach. Once I get out, I'm going to destroy this stupid village. Hey, it's not like a fear of fire is going to change him that much. Character profiles. Neji Hyuga. Neji is a genius. This gives him the ability to create and pull out new moves at the drop of a hat. He can also quickly figure out strengths and weaknesses. In addition, he can quickly identify patterns and trends in a fight. Because of his skills and intellect, he's a bit arrogant. But he does have the strength to back up his mouth. Because of the fight at the Chunin exam, Neji has changed. Did you know? Neji is a 3-time winner of the annual Go tournament. However, while he's good at the game, he doesn't play it with much emotion. To him, one piece is the same as another. So he doesn't care about sacrificing any of them. Because of this, he'd lose badly against Shikamaru and Shikaku. Asuma would be a good challenge. Now that he's more receptive about recognizing the value of others, however, his game will suffer as he struggles to keep every one of his pieces alive. Once he understands that some of the pieces will be glad to give their life as long as it can help the others, his game will significantly improve. Hanabi Hyuga. Hanabi is scarily intelligent for a kid. This makes her a bit arrogant, and she sort of believes that she knows everything. She knows a lot, but there's a ton of gaps in her knowledge. One particularly good example is her knowledge of social matters. She's really naive here because her father often shelters her from other children. The people that her father lets her meet tend to be stuffy, rich, high-ranking old fogies that entertain her with stories of their past regrets and exploits. Hanabi has a frightening glare which she can use to boss people around. If that's not enough, she has a fiercely protective father and sister. Living in the Hyuga household has given her a calm, reserved temperament. She can hide her emotions well, because anything more energetic and she'll annoy her father. Unfortunately, she's still a kid. And her energy has to go somewhere. She daydreams a lot when she's not busy. To explain why Hanabi is determined to find a way to make the marriage happen, first of all, it was taken away from her. Second of all, her imagination went through the roof again as she recalled the stories from the old ladies. Third of all, she doesn't understand why people marry in the first place. Like Naruto, she just believes that a marriage is a declaration of friendship. Did you know? Hanabi is also known as the Queen of Cheaters. Her win rate is actually better than Naruto's, even when the crowd suspects. However, her wins are far less spectacular. Hanabi's specialty is moving her hands faster than the eye can see. She'd make a great magician. Did you know? Hiyashi stopped playing against Hanabi because she cheats so often she doesn't have to think about doing it anymore. The only sign that they have that his youngest daughter is cheating is that she is eventually starting to win. Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto has an odd tendency to shoot herself in the foot. Anyway, in this chapter, she's weakened greatly because she's going through a period where she's afraid and distrustful of others, boys in particular. In addition, her confidence has taken a major hit, meaning she's lost and confused. What this means is that she'll follow anybody who leads her. I suppose you could say she got through the nightmare jutsu unscathed. She's still as innocent as ever when it comes to the ways of social life. There's also good news about her current condition. Naruto is slowly recovering. Now, when mad, she can forget her fears for a moment and unleash her fury. Kyuubi. In my opinion, Kyuubi has the oddest quirks in this story. To add on from last time, the first thing that you should notice is that he's deathly afraid of fire, even if it can't hurt him. I'm not sure why, I suppose a carryover from bestial instincts. Not only is he good at detecting illusions, he's also a master of making them. So maybe he's not as good at physical combat as we're led to believe. That is true, but only skill-wise. He possesses his speed and strength to make up for his lack of skills. Kyuubi guards Naruto because he wants something from her. Namely, get this in. Hash and collar off. To this end, he's also another antagonist. I'm not quite sure why Kyuubi is afraid of Naruto dying before the collar comes off. I can guess, however. He'll let me know if I'm wrong. Kyuubi hates seeing weakness. His weapon of choice is a bullwhip. It acts like one of his tails. 10-tailed fox. Ha ha ha. Anyway, it's just an ordinary bullwhip. Not as cool as a legendary sword, but the fox can do frightening things with it. Did you know? Kyuubi's tails poof up when he's scared. Too bad they're hidden under his cape. It's definitely a sight to see. Did you know? Naruto tried to remove his collar but she couldn't. It's not because she lacked the strength. It's because, in her heart, she didn't want to. Naruto stepped into the living room with one arm stretched into the air and a large smile on her face. Her other arm was over her head and pulling on the first one a little as she stretched to work the kinks out of her back. She stopped and blinked. Then she blinked again before she rubbed her eyes. What are you doing? She finally asked when she realized she wasn't seeing things. Looking for a piece of paper with your signature on it so that I can forge it, Hanabi sleepily replied. She had been here all night. Oh, Naruto said after a moment. Why don't you ask me to sign it instead? Hanabi suddenly stood up and walked over. She held out a piece of paper and said, please sign here. She pointed at the indicated spot. Naruto took the document and looked curiously at it for a moment. She finally looked up. What is it? Hanabi sighed. It's a signature form that gives me permission to add your name to our marriage certificate. Naruto scratched her head for a moment before she held the document out. No, that's okay. I have enough knives already. Hanabi looked oddly at the blonde for a moment. She shook her head. Sleepiness was making her hear weird things. You don't want to sign it? Of course not. I already told you that I have too many knives, the other girl briskly repeated. So she wasn't hearing things. Very well, Hanabi said as she took back the document before looking around the messy living room. Could you sign this? Hanabi asked as she picked up something from the ground and held it out. Naruto looked oddly at it for a moment before she shrugged. I don't know why you want me to sign a blank piece of paper, but okay. Do you have a pen? Hanabi helpfully held out the requested item and Naruto quickly signed in a random spot. The Hyuga picked up the paper before she promptly walked toward the door. Bye whoever you are, Naruto cheerfully called out right as the shorter girl stepped out of her apartment. Meanwhile, Hiashi and Hinata were tirelessly scanning through Konoha in their epic search. They had been up all night searching for their missing family member. What if she's at Naruto-kun's home? Hinata finally asked, proposing the one spot they hadn't searched yet. Hanabi is forbidden from entering that part of the village, daughter, Hiashi promptly replied. Of course, Hinata quietly said. Their search continued. Back again? The clerk asked as he glanced over the counter. Yes, Hanabi tiredly replied as she struggled to stand on the tips of her toes. She extended Naruto's completed signature form toward the clerk. The clerk reached over and took it. Hanabi stepped back so that she could see the man behind the tall desk. This signature, the clerk slowly said. The girl remained silent. Did he suspect something? The clerk then shrugged, as he set down the signature form and found the marriage form that Hanabi had filed yesterday. Sliding back a little, he opened a drawer and pulled a blank marriage certificate from his desk. He started to fill in a few of the blanks on the marriage certificate before he suddenly stopped writing. According to your birth date, you're 7 years old? The man asked in surprise. Hanabi nodded briskly. How old is? The clerk looked at the application for a brief moment. Naruto then? He asked. 12, Hanabi replied, quickly recalling that Naruto was in her sister's class. I'm sorry, but both of you are too young to be married. Naruto is a nin, Hanabi promptly said. Okay, Naruto is old enough. But you're still too young. Hanabi promptly glared, although her tiredness killed the effect. Sensing the weakness of her attack, Hanabi immediately used her family name. I am a member of the Hyuga main branch and I demand that you marry us. Instead of being worried, a thoughtful look appeared on the bespectacled man's face. Well, I was leafing through the marriage laws one night. And, the small girl snapped. Well, the clerk hesitated. Did you find any exceptions to being underage? No. Can you look the other way? Hanabi asked as she pulled out a large stack of Ryo bills from her pocket and flashed it at the clerk. The clerk looked interestedly at the bills before he quickly looked away. No. There's a law against that too. Then what did you find? Hanabi demanded. Nothing. The laws on marriage are pretty strict actually. There are even rules that restricts the number of partners that one can have in a lifetime. There really isn't anything I can do. There was a thud. What did you do? The man that was next in line suddenly shouted. The clerk peered over the desk to see the girl bent over, her palms on the floor. Spots slowly dotted the floor. Hanabi was crying. Discover more. Manga subscriptions. Comic book subscriptions. Fan fiction. Hey, the clerk said. Listen. Even though the girl on the floor wasn't looking up at him, he continued anyway. I can't do anything, but there might be a way. The girl looked up at him with hope in her eyes. If you can get the Hokage to approve, you can be married that way. Just bring back the marriage declaration so I can file it away. A neutral look immediately replaced the Hyuga girl's expression. Quickly wiping her face with her sleeve, the girl bowed and ran out. Next. The clerk finally called out. What was that all about? The next in line asked as he slowly stepped up. The clerk shrugged. Marriage is a popular topic among young girls these days. They normally give up when they first see the forms, but she took it farther than most. Naruto silently padded into the large office. She immediately saw that the large desk was empty. Looking slightly to the left and right, Naruto noticed that Shizune wasn't at her usual spot either. She turned to leave, only to leap back with a yelp of surprise. No missions today, brat, Tsunade said as she entered the room with a large bottle of sake balanced on her head. Naruto noticed that the old hag had her hands hidden behind her back. Shizune followed close behind her mentor, her hands also concealed behind her body. Taunton was the last to enter the room. She was sniffing around warily as she followed the two taller women. A grin appeared on the fifth's face, causing Naruto to blink and step back. However, Tsunade announced as she brought her hands forward to show what she was hiding. You get to choose today, brat. Which would you like to wear? The Hokage asked as she showed what was in her hands. Damn it. I don't want to. That one. Can I wear that one? Please. Naruto begged. She was very close to falling on her knees and worshipping the clothing in Tsunade's hands. Tsunade gave Naruto the requested item before she pulled something else out from thin air. Don't forget this, Tsunade said as she held up a cap. It immediately disappeared from the Hokage's hands. Foregoing modesty, Naruto quickly changed right in front of them. She soon had on bright orange overalls and an orange t-shirt. A bright orange buttonless visored newspaper boy cap perched precariously on her head. It was clearly too large for her head. Another interesting thing about it was the orange spiral within a white circle embossed on the front. Naruto had a great big smile on her face as she dashed out of the room to show the world her new style. Back in the room, Tsunade turned smugly to her apprentice. Shizune stood to the side, forgotten, a sad look on her face as she held a nice black and white dress in her hands. Told you she'd wear it, Tsunade gloated as she pulled the sake bottle off her head and prepared to uncap the bottle. Shizune looked down at the dress in her hands for a moment before she looked up with narrowed eyes. She growled long and low. Hey, what's with that look? Tsunade asked as she backed away slightly, her hands in a warding gesture. Shizune cried loudly in anger as she tackled her teacher. The sake bottle went flying through the air, only to land harmlessly on the desk. After several minutes of floundering. It doesn't fit, Shizune cried. Of course it doesn't, Tsunade roared in reply as she struggled to free her arms and pull the dress off of her head. There was a small knock on the doorframe. With great effort, Tsunade finally managed to remove the dress from her head without ripping it apart. Now able to see again, she turned to find Hanabi standing at the door. She quickly looked down at the dress in her hands. Looking up, she that her apprentice was also staring intently at the small dress. The mousy woman suddenly looked up as well. Their eyes met, and a silent message passed between the two of them before the two turned back toward the patiently waiting white-eyed girl. Large smirks suddenly appeared on both women's faces. Naruto sobbed quietly as she glared at the ground. She was currently sitting on a large root and leaning against an ancient tree in the park. Numerous cuts and bruises lined the exposed skin on her face, neck, and arms. The blue overall that she was wearing even had holes in them. Hey, came a lazy voice. Naruto looked up. It was Shikamaru. I saw what happened. Come to gloat? She angrily asked. No, I came to say sorry. Why? Naruto asked curiously. I was there, I should have stopped her before she started. Don't worry about it, Naruto quietly said as she leaned forward to rest her chin on her knees. She picked at the ground with a small stick in her hands. You do know that you look better, right? Do I? Naruto sniffed. Shikamaru hesitantly nodded as he took a seat next to her and laid down. Don't tell her I said this, but Ino is an expert at makeup and. When he said that, blue is less troublesome than orange, Naruto's face morphed into a mask of fury as she leapt upon the lazy cloud watcher. Discover more. Writing workshops. Community forums. Author interviews. I want them back. Naruto howled as she struggled to punch him. It's a good thing she was so small and light, Shikamaru was barely holding the angry girl back. He finally managed to place his hands solidly on her chest and push her off with one mighty grunt. Naruto immediately rolled over before digging her feet into the grass as she prepared to leap at him with blood in her eyes. Except, she couldn't move. Kujimane no Jutsu was a success. Shikamaru lazily said as he slowly got up and backed away. Once he was a comfortable distance away, he started to talk. Calm down, Naruto. I'll have Ino return them to you. Okay. Naruto stopped struggling. Really? She asked with glimmering eyes. Her face had lit up so radiantly that it was almost as if she wasn't angry or sad in the first place. Okay. I'm calm, she chirped. Shikamaru released her. But instead of heading towards Ino's house, Naruto watched as Shikamaru found a wide open spot and laid down. A few minutes passed before a shadow suddenly blocked his sunlight. Shikamaru turned his head slightly to see why. Naruto was crouched beside his head and peering curiously down at him. Nay, why aren't you getting them now? She asked. Shikamaru gave a half-hearted shrug. It's too troublesome to do it right now, he said. When a confused look appeared on the other's face, the shadow user sighed. Ino wants me to join her on a shopping trip today. It'll be less troublesome if I went at night when all of the shops are closed, he clarified. A vein started pulsing upon Naruto's forehead. Get them now, she growled as she leaned forward menacingly. Quote. Shikamaru looked at the blonde for a moment. Troublesome, he said as he slowly sat up. She might look innocent, but that unseen danger wafting off of her in waves was a credible threat. Yay! Naruto cheered when she saw what was in Shikamaru's hands when he left Ino's house half an hour later. 5 o'clock, the lazy Nara moaned as he handed over the orange t-shirt, cap, and overalls. Naruto stopped admiring her clothing to look up at him. She asked with a curious look on her face. In exchange for those, Ino wants me to take her on a date at 5. Then take her on a date. Naruto snapped before she started to walk away. I'm not even dressed, the shadow user lazily said, freezing the blonde in place. Naruto looked at him for a moment before she took his arm and started to lead him somewhere. I'd rather be cloud watching. Shikamaru mumbled as he let himself be pulled along. The two stood inside of one of Naruto's favorite clothing shop. Nay, how about this? Naruto, now wearing her new orange overalls again, held up a shirt and pants komba. She was currently standing next to the store's bargain bin. It was full of orange clothes. I'm not wearing that, Shikamaru said irritatedly. Naruto's face fell. She carefully returned the two to the box before she rummaged through it again. A happy look appeared. This is nice, she cheerfully said, presenting what she found. No, it isn't, Shikamaru deadpanned. After several more rejections. Find your own clothes then. Naruto angrily shouted at Shikamaru when she finally had enough of him shooting down every single one of her choices. Too much trouble. Let's come back later, he suggested. Discover more. Writing contests. Book recommendations. Fan art commissions. It really was too much trouble, and she wanted to agree, she really did. But she didn't want to see her effort go to waste. So, no, get it done now. She screeched in his face. With a sigh, Shikamaru turned and pulled something from off of a nearby rack. Naruto immediately fell to the ground and burst out laughing. Shikamaru just stood there with a lazy look on his face. The two stepped into the bright sun. Good luck on your date with Ino, Naruto said as she prepared to walk away. Shikamaru briefly grumbled something about clothes and being poorer before he lazily said, I don't know where to eat. Naruto froze in place, the motion causing the oversized cap that she was wearing to slip over her eyes. Ramen, Naruto loudly proclaimed into the cap. That's not a good restaurant, Shikamaru said with a sweat drop. Naruto lifted the orange cap with a hand, revealing her crystal blue eyes. It is too, she defended as she reached forward and took his free hand. She was going to show him just how perfect ramen was for every occasion. Even for a date with Ino. They hadn't gone far when Naruto felt a small tap on her shoulder. It's you, she shouted when she turned and saw the girl that had been in her house earlier. The black-haired girl was still dressed in her traditional black kimono. Back at the Hokage Tower, Tsunade and Shizune stared at the nice black and white dress, wondering what they were going to do with it. There was a knock. It was Sakura. Back in the market district. You look tired, are you all right? Naruto asked the shorter girl with the cold look on her face. She received a cool nod in reply. Oh, okay. So what did you want? The hyperactive blonde asked before she was forced to fall back a little as something was pushed in her face. As Hokage, I now declare Naruto Uzumaki and Hanabi Hyuga married. This document announces this change in status and gives the bearer the right to change the records to update this new development even if. Tsunade. Hanabi pulled the scroll back and looked expectantly up at Naruto. Oh, what did it say? Naruto dumbly asked. It was the language of law, How was she expected to read and understand it? The ground shook slightly when the two near her suddenly fell over. Just kidding. Shikamaru was too lazy for that, and Hanabi was willing to work around her new partner's problems. We're married, Hanabi calmly explained as she pulled the scroll back and rolled it up. Shikamaru's eyes widened, but he said nothing. Naruto's confused look remained. Oh, what does that mean? Hanabi bowed her head in thought before she looked up. Your home is now my home. Your food is now my food. Your clothes are now mine, she sternly said. Okay. Naruto interrupted as she scratched her head. Wow. So complicated, she mumbled to herself. So you agree? Hanabi asked. Not really. Naruto replied. Hokage-sama mentioned that you might not, so she gave me these. Hanabi said as she reached into her voluminous sleeve and pulled something out. Okay. Naruto cheered as she swiped the golden coupons that granted her 50% off on her next Ichiraku visit. She finally stopped drooling on the tickets to look up. There was a confused expression on her new friend's face. What are you doing? Hanabi finally asked. Oh, I just took Shikamaru shopping for new clothes. And now I'm going to show him that Ichiraku's ramen is a good place to take a date. I don't know what we'll do next, but have fun on your date, Hanabi interrupted as she passed them and continued on her way. The two watched the younger girl slouch a little some distance out. She looks a bit tired, Naruto commented before she turned to her companion. Date? She asked curiously as she lifted the cap out of her eyes again. What do you think she meant, Shikamaru? The shadow user just shrugged. After several bowls of ramen, the two left Ichiraku's. Shikamaru was still wholly unconvinced of the value of taking Ino to the ramen stand for a date, even if it was cheap. Naruto didn't notice because something else had caught her eye. Nay, do you need to show Ino something fun to do? Naruto asked. No, why? Shikamaru asked before he turned to see what the blonde girl was pointing at. Konoha 5th Annual Inventions Show. Admission. Free. Wah! I've always wanted to come to this fair since it first started, the girl excitedly cried as she ran ahead. Naruto. Shikamaru started to say. But it was too late. Naruto had already entered the large crowd. With a sigh, he slouched forward and followed. Troublesome girl. Look, Shikamaru. Naruto shouted as she bounced on a cushion of a massage chair. Shikamaru. Naruto suddenly shouted from the other side of the show. The megaphone was suddenly ripped from her hands by the angry booth owner. The girl pouted slightly before she ran into the crowd. Shikamaru. Look. Naruto cried as she sat on a large rubber ball. There were handholds and a seat on the ball for a rider. Unfortunately, stability was still an issue as Naruto conveniently demonstrated when the ball rolled forward, throwing off its rider before running her over. After flailing for a bit, Naruto finally sat up with an embarrassed smile. Her smile soon turned to shock and dismay. A redhead woman had an unresisting Shikamaru in her grasp. Who are you? What are you doing to Shikamaru? Naruto demanded as she reached out and picked up her oversized orange cap. She plopped it back on her head before she glared at the taller woman. The redhead had a devilish smirk on her face as she said, "Take a guess, brat." Naruto squinted at the woman for a second. When she saw soft furry ears and several tails flash for a brief second, she instantly knew who this was. Ga, Ero Sennin, how did you figure out my Oryoku no Jutsu? Naruto demanded. The red-headed woman was abruptly dog-piled by a group of angry women clad in towels. Jiraiya took that moment to step out from behind Naruto. He smacked her on the back of the head. Ack! Naruto cried as stars filled her vision. As if I'd learned such a stupid jutsu from you, Gaki. Jiraiya shot back. It had become suspiciously quiet. Get him! One woman finally shouted as the rest jumped off of their somewhat innocent victim and rushed the blonde girl and the old man. Wait, I haven't presented my new toaster yet. Jiraiya shouted as he turned and ran for it. In a stunning moment of luck, Naruto wasn't trampled when the stampede passed her. The red-headed woman quickly shot to her feet. Never mind, brat, she angrily said as she walked over to Shikamaru and prepared to pick him up. However, there was another red-headed woman in back of Shikamaru who was kneeling down and trying to untie him. Two pairs of red eyes met. Anata. The one in back of Shikamaru suddenly shouted as she happily turned behind her and called to her husband. Look, my long-lost twin. The one in front of Shikamaru turned around happily as well. Her face soon fell and the words died in her throat when she saw who was behind her. Ow! Naruto suddenly cried. What was that for? Naruto shouted at the redhead lady in front of her before she turned around when she felt someone staring at her. I was under the impression that you were sick. A man that looked suspiciously like the fourth said as he stepped up to her. Naruto didn't hesitate. Not when her life was on the line. I am Datbeo. She pretended to cough several times. I was going to the drugstore for some medicine. She coughed again, the jerking motion causing her cap to slip over her eyes once more. The blonde man continued to give her a long searching look before he shrugged and turned to his wife. You don't have a twin, honey. Remember, you're an only child. Now, we have to hurry home. Little Naruto still doesn't have a babysitter. Oh, that's right, the woman enthusiastically said, agreeing with her husband on both points. She took her husband's hand and the two disappeared in a bright yellow flash. Naruto raised the cap from her eyes, before she turned and glared up at the red-haired woman. Something had just occurred to her. You're the fox, aren't you? The redhead lady gaped at the short blonde for a moment before the shock disappeared and amusement took over. That's right, brat. Naruto's expression suddenly changed. How come you're a girl now? Did you have a seal concealing you in a genjutsu too? Kyuubi fixed the blonde with a half-lidded gaze. Fool, I'm neither guy nor girl. My true form is a fox. Quote. It was Naruto's turn to gape at Kyuubi in shock. The surprise quickly left as duty made itself known. Let Shikamaru go. He has a date in less than an hour. She demanded. Only if you beat me, Kyuubi replied with a large toothy grin. But if I win, you remove the collar and I keep the worthless boy. Naruto cried in surprise. Agreed, she asked with a seductive wink. That annoyed her. Fine, Naruto shouted with a glare. Hey, don't I get a say in this? Shikamaru calmly asked. No, both females shouted loudly at him. Troublesome, Shikamaru muttered. What's the contest? Naruto demanded as she turned back to the red-headed woman. The two suddenly turned when they heard someone loudly announce. Let's hear it for Kakashi Hatake with a score of 92. Just like my eternal rival to beat me in a youthful match of karaoke, Guy's voice came right after. Naruto and Kyuubi look at each other before they pushed through the line of people waiting to sing. Despite the protests from the crowd, no one wanted to challenge the two who were obviously in the middle of a full-scale war. Both were soon the next in line and once on stage, Shikamaru was abruptly tossed against the glaringly bright backdrop as the two picked their song and prepared to sing. Naruto had a great voice. However, the crowd was soon booing and shouting for her to get off the stage. Having almost never listened to a song in her life, she was completely tone-deaf. Steaming, Naruto stopped singing to shout a few choice words. A quarter of the crowd scurried away in fear. Only a quarter. You're slipping, brat, Kyuubi blandly commented. Shut up, Naruto shouted into the microphone, causing the rest of the crowd to cover their ears. The song was halted midway through and the automatic scorer immediately gave Naruto a 23 out of 100. It was now Kyuubi's turn. When she walked up, the crowd grew 5 times larger. In moments, the crowd stopped leering at the redhead women to cover their ears. It was too dangerous to remove their hands from their ears and pull her off, and Kyuubi was allowed to sing the song to completion. 3 minutes of nightmarish agony that the crowd would never forget. When the song finally ended, Naruto congratulated Kyuubi on a song well done. On the television screen, the scorer gave a score of, "My ears. Truly the worst. flashed right underneath. The blonde didn't notice the crowd swarm onto the stage with murder in their eyes. However, Kyuubi certainly did, and she immediately pulled out a pair of weapons to defend herself. One of them was her trusty bullwhip and the other was the legendary sword. Kyuubi took a long look at the sword for a moment before she thrust it into Naruto's arms. Naruto looked at the weapon in her hands in surprise before she pulled it out of the sheath. She swung and the crowd in front of her reared back in fear. She used it fairly well. When someone tried to blindside her, a wide threatening swipe in his direction scared him off. For a minute, she kept the crowd around her at bay while Kyuubi cleared a path. But then Naruto thrust a bit too hard and her cap fell over her eyes. Now blind, she panicked. In moments, she was wildly chopping the sword in all directions. Really wildly. Stop, brat, Kyuubi ordered as she ducked out of the way to avoid friendly fire. She's armed, someone from a group of peacekeeping nin shouted as they arrived to break up the conflict. They pulled out shuriken of all types and threw. Quickly batting the flying metal shards from out of the air with the whip, Kyuubi leapt at Naruto. Several cuts appeared on her loose sleeves before she managed to knock Naruto's hat off. Naruto immediately stopped swinging to bend down and pick it up. Kyuubi had other plans, however, as she grabbed the blonde girl around the waist and leapt high into the air. No, my hat, Naruto cried as she vainly reached for the orange eyesore. After them, the leader of the pack of nin shouted. They quickly followed after the troublemakers. Kyuubi easily lost their pursuers. And soon she returned with Naruto to the scene of the crime. There, they found Shikamaru untied and being chewed out by Ino. Ino suddenly rounded on them. You hussy. I can't believe you. Who's a hussy? Naruto shouted angrily as she looked around for the target. She didn't know what hussy meant, but it sounded as bad as a pervert. She was about to attack the fox when she felt someone grab her overall straps. You, Ino coldly replied as she hauled the other blonde over. Me. I'm not a hussy, Naruto cried as she grasped Ino's arms and tried to pull them off. Explain why you have boys following you everywhere you go then. I don't know what you're talking about, Naruto said as she opened her mouth wide and prepared to chomp down on one of the hands holding her. She never had a chance to bite before Ino shook her vigorously before hauling her aside with one hand. There, Ino shouted. Naruto slowly turned her head to see where Ino was pointing and shrieked. She immediately leapt at Ino for support. Peering out of a nearby alleyway, Kiba and Lee were grinning and waving sheepishly at being spotted. Gaara stood behind them, with an emotionless look on his face. In the blink of an eye they disappeared around the corner. Get off, Ino shouted as she struggled to pry the girl off. How long have they been following me? Naruto demanded as she clung fearfully to the taller blonde, almost like an octopus. She had a wild look on her face when she turned to Shikamaru for an answer. I saw them when Ino dragged you into her house, Shikamaru helpfully supplied. We've been following you for a lot longer actually, Kiba volunteered as he stepped out from behind them. At least a week now, he said as he pulled out several pictures. A few had Naruto in a wedding dress. Another few had Naruto appear from around a corner with a small bundle in her hands. Another subset had her walking back out in a patrolling fox costume. Naruto suddenly stopped looking at the images to swing around and hide behind Ino when Gaara and Lee decided to appear from behind Kiba. Can't breathe, Ino gasped. Naruto, you're killing her, Shikamaru calmly said. Naruto wasn't listening, instead she was shouting, why? Why? Into Ino's back. Every single boy chose that moment to look away, with the exception of Gaara. Ino was turning purple. Ha ha ha, I see. Brat, they're interested in you, Kyuubi said as she pantomimed lots of kissing and hugging to emphasize her point. Gaara gave a slight nod as he took a fearless step forward. What she said, he neutrally said. Ino found herself on the ground right after. She immediately took a deep breath. No, Naruto shrieked as she disappeared in the distance. We are, Gara-san? Lee curiously asked. Quote. Yes, the red-headed boy neutrally replied. Inwardly, Shikamaru was wondering why he wanted to ask the blonde girl for a raise in his allowance. It's not like Naruto was his mother. Naruto soon found herself in front of the Hokage. After relaying her plight, she was given a brief no. Bachan. No brat, Tsunade said without looking up. Please. That made Tsunade pause in her writing. Hokage-sama, the girl begged. The fifth looked up curiously at the blonde girl. You must really be desperate. I am. My answer is still no. Tsunade said as she returned to the paperwork. Naruto hung her head and left the room. It wasn't her fault she lost the cap. Naruto quickly shoved several boxers into her travel pack. She didn't care if the Hokage said no, she was packing and leaving Konoha. Picking up the travel pack after throwing in a few cups of ramen, closing it, and mounting a sleeping bag on top, she ran for the door. And with that, Naruto snuck past the gates of Konoha on her way to freedom. The 8 hidden shadows -1 chose the following moment to reveal themselves. And when they did, they exchanged confused looks with each other when they realized that they were not alone. They wordlessly turned and started to follow the blonde. I'm not going to let you pass, growled a voice from behind them. The entire group turned as one to the new voice. It was dark, so they could not tell. But it appeared to belong to a red-headed man with a whip in one hand. They chose to ignore him and continue forward. They had the advantage of numbers. Except there were now 2 standing in front of them. Hiyashi and Hinata. Where's Hanabi? Hinata demanded. The group turned to the shortest one, only to discover that she wasn't there anymore. None of them, Kyuubi included, knew what to say. Hinata mistook their silence. So you refuse